to get out and vote and consider Leonard Christian. Another one of our pilots that's very involved is Mr. Dent over at Moses Lake, and he's up for re-election this year, but doesn't really apply to us. They're really sorting out a lot of the initiatives right now for FAA money for the state of Washington. And of course, with COVID-19, things have been kind of on delay. One thing at the state level, though, and we're a test case tonight to see if we can bring this virtual reality into everybody's home, because we've been kind of stuck not seeing each other, and we like to see each other, but at the same time, the technology that we have, if we can get it to work tonight, is going to make our availability to share our story at WPA to a lot more pilots than maybe we can do at just physical meetings and things.
See if we can get the projector working.
I didn't think anything else really exciting to say, but hopefully the technology is moving there.
But this is going to have to
It
be
looks
quite
like
a
we're
bit
doing
higher.
good, so back to John.
No, it's actually pretty good where it is.
The projector?
Okay, we have our technical difficulties resolved. Now if we can just wake up the projector because it fell asleep. And I think we are ready to go. So first of all, I wanted to say hello now that we're beginning our live stream on YouTube. My name's John. I'm the WPA chapter president here for Spokane. And we just wanted to thank you for being part of our inaugural YouTube live presentation of our general meeting. So thank you for joining us. We are still working out the bugs on some of this technology, so we appreciate your patience, but we would also welcome your feedback on how things are going and how you enjoy the experience. If you are logging online for Wings credit, we just ask that you send an email to the WPA Gmail link that you'll find in the YouTube comments. Just send us an email that has your email address, your name, and your zip code, and we will take care of working with the FAA for Wings credit beyond that. So again, thank you for joining us. And we realize that the visual is reversed. That's a webcam limitation that we are working with, where we're getting a new webcam that won't have that for the next presentation. So with that, Jay, are you ready for me to introduce you? Okay. I have the pleasure tonight of introducing Mr. Jay Bigley. I left all my notes over here on the table. Jay is the chief instructor at Moody. And how long do you say you've been there? 20 years?
20 years.
20 years. And I was telling Jay, I wasn't buttering him up either. I was just saying, I don't think you look like a guy who should be in that job for 20 years. He looks a little too young for that. But he's also a designated pilot examiner at DPE. That might be why I'm buttering him up just a little bit. And how long have you been at DPE, Jay?
Maybe 11, 12 years.
11 or 12 years. Okay. So we're talking, we're going to hear tonight from a very experienced pilot, a professional with the FAA. And one of the things I appreciate about Jay is his heart about teaching. He's a teacher. If you've been around some instructors, they're just natural teachers. Jay is one of those people. He loves to see people progress, if I could speak for you, progress in their aviation knowledge and their aviation safety. I've seen that as I've worked with him on a couple things in the past. And Jay's background is kind of impressive as an aviator. He flew with Mission Aviation Fellowship in Mali, West Africa, before he was with Moody. And of course, his legacy goes beyond just aviation. He's been married for 25 years. He's got 3 kids, and just an outstanding guy. And so with that being said, I think we're ready to hear from Mr. Jay Bigley. And thank you again for coming tonight.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I am the first YouTube. How come you're still on there? I'm not on there.
There's a 5-second delay.
Ooh. Can I correct my mistakes then? I'm a little bit of a sick individual because I love conducting tests. And the reason I love to conduct tests is because I get to show up after the applicant and the instructor have worked for months, maybe years, and I get to be the one that hands that piece of paper over to allow that person to take those privileges in the airplane. And if things don't go good the first time, then hopefully we find the things that need to be fixed. They go get those things fixed, and then I get to hand that paper. So being that guy that gives that paper that helps this person realize a dream they've always had, or maybe the next step in their career as they're making their way to the airlines, or even instructing. It really, for me, is a joy. I also really enjoy the work I do at Moody. I do love to teach, and working with young people who have committed their lives to the Lord and have meaning for what they're doing and purpose and drive. I had a frustrating day today, so it doesn't mean you don't have frustrating days. But wow, it's just amazing to work with young people like that, and then just amazing coworkers. Today, you know, when I was approached, man, this was back late last year, I think, when I was asked to do this, and then, you know, with COVID and how things got delayed, I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about, because this is something that I'm observing as an examiner. I kind of joke at work. I tell my boss that I'm really looking for that first sabbatical, because I want to write a book. And I wanted to write a book on how to raise kids, things that did not work. But I'm probably going to scrap that one. But the experiences as an examiner are rich. Today I'm going to talk about a couple scenarios that are actual. And I'm not going to give names. I mean, I don't want you to think that if I do a test with you that somehow you'll show up in a presentation somewhere. But there's a lot of really good lessons from this. And one of the things that I've started to observe as an examiner are applicants that tend to go beyond where they should be going. And they don't know why. But I think it's true for all of us as pilots. I think there's times that, I mean, I could ask, have you gotten yourself into a tight situation with an aircraft? And we'll make it rhetorical. But just think back, in all the years and hours of experience here, have you ever gotten yourself in a situation that it was tight and it wasn't looking good? And I'm curious, what did you do? Did you guess? Did you give up? Did you impulsively respond? Did you get burned? Hopefully you didn't get burned too bad. Have you suffered the consequences of a bad decision in an aircraft? How costly was it? Hopefully, if it was really bad, it was just damage to the airplane, and no lives were injured or no deaths were a result. But it can be very unforgiving. Do you know someone who made a bad decision in an aircraft that was costly? And what should have they done differently? And it's really easy to be that Monday quarterback, isn't it? Where you can look back on what was done the day before, the weeks before, the months before, and it's really easy to be critical and very easy to have judgment on what somebody did. But when you're in the heat of the battle, sometimes it's very hard to know what to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Okay, so this was on January 20. I was conducting a private pilot test down in Walla Walla. And I do record on my iPad from time to time, especially instrument checks, because on those especially to kind of show what the applicant was doing during the test. But for some reason, I just started recording on my iPad. And this is pretty much what happened. Now, I know it looks like a lot of confusion, but you know, there's steep turns in there, there's slow flight, there's power on, power off stalls. But in this specific situation, it was about 4,000 feet overcast. There was a lot of mist, and if you guys know the Walla Walla area, there's a mountain range right along here, and pretty close to the airport, right over in here, there's peaks that are up around 4,000 feet, so not that bad. And Walla Walla itself is about 1,200 feet. So when we were about in here starting to do some maneuvers, the applicant decided to go from 4,500 down to 2,500, which was very perplexing to me because I love to talk. And so at Moody, the students know that I'm a talker. So when I get in the plane and I'm conducting a test, I stop. And they're like, there's something wrong, or maybe I'm doing something wrong because Jay's being quiet. But I have to be quiet during tests because I'm just observing. And letting the applicant know what the next thing is that they need to do. So he descended and had no idea why he descended. It wasn't clouds. I mean, we had plenty of, again, this was 4,000 feet above the ground, so we had a good 1,500 feet above him before the overcast. We did have some mist over here against the mountains, and again, over towards Tri-Cities, it was also a little misty. So that was a little bit perplexing. The applicant also still had Pendleton, because for the cross-country portion, he was going to Pendleton. That was still in his GPS. And as he was given reports of his location, he was reporting on company frequency to other aircraft from the Walla Walla area. but was basing his distance from Walla Walla really distance from Pendleton. So it didn't make any sense. He had a GPS. He had with a moving map. He had an iPad. The thing that was really interesting was at this point where the plane is located, and again, you can kind of see the profile view. It kind of shows you the speed and it shows you the altitudes. At 2150 Zulu, he was at 2,000 feet, 80 knots. 30 seconds later, 2,300 feet, 87 knots. 30 seconds later, 2,150. And you can kind of go through that and you can see that the altitude and the airspeed was pretty much all over. And this was his trying to get back to Walla Walla. And when he put it in the GPS, I kind of looked and I could see Walla Walla. So I could see the airport, but for some reason he continued to maneuver towards the northeast. He was convinced that the airport was over here somewhere. Now on this next slide, I kind of put some clouds on there so you can kind of see what it looked like. So this is where he was starting to make all those variations in airspeed and variations in altitude. The terrain was pretty much covered. But the point where I had to call the test was when he was going right towards the mountains descending and going right towards the clouds. And I was just thinking, man, I wish I could get in his brain and just see what's going on in there because he's got to be thinking something. But of course I can't say anything. That's not the right time to ask them, what are you thinking, right? So we pretty much had to call it and head back to Walla Walla. What were some contributing factors? Probably poor situational awareness, again, having equipment that was relative to a different airport than the one he was operating at, getting bad information back. Really knowing where the airport was, even though the GPS told him where to go. He put Walla Walla in. That's when he realized he still had Pendleton in. And why he continued to go towards the northeast, have no idea. Division of attention, resource management. This is something that we don't talk a whole lot about as instructors, but it's something that needs to be taught very, very well. Because I find a lot of times in a test, an applicant is reluctant when ATC tells them to turn towards a fix or an airport and they don't know where that is. They don't ask, can you give me an initial heading? What's wrong with that? That's not a failing item, right? That's a resource. You're busy, you're a little bit overwhelmed. He tells you to go. I've heard the airlines say, can you spell that waypoint? I've even heard the airlines asking for an initial heading. But we don't teach our students to do that. Teach them how to use some resources that are available to them. Inadequate instruction. If I come and speak again, I'll probably speak on that. Usually when I get perturbed inwardly, because as an examiner, I never show my displeasure outside, but inside, it's usually the result of bad instruction. The student is doing something they were taught to do that was in clear violation of regulation or ACS requirements. I don't know if it was inadequate instruction in that scenario or not. Can you think of any others that might have been contributing factors to this?
Confusion, did he talk to you later?
A little bit later in the presentation, I always ask the applicant, what were you thinking? But I usually do that after we have a conversation about whether it was acceptable or not. It's like, what were you thinking? I'm just dying to know. And what I hear all the time is, I don't know. And that's why I wanted to talk about this tonight, is because we get to the point as pilots, I have, and I'm going to tell you a story of myself, lest I sound judgmental about some of these tests that I've done. This is another one. This is out of Martin Field, a private applicant wanting to get a test done. This is his third attempt at it due to weather. I took this picture on my phone or my iPad as we were at the end of the runway about to put the throttle forward on a VFR private pilot check ride. That system's going south to north. There's lightning. The visibility was less than 5 miles. But he wanted to go so bad. And his instructor's standing over in the rain, and I can just look at his instructor, and he's sitting here doing, please don't go. So the applicant applied the throttle, and another lightning flash. He keeps going. Of course, my intention is to pull the throttle back at some point. So we're rolling down the runway, and I'm just like, come on, do something, make a good decision. And he didn't. So right before rotation, I had to bring the throttle back. We got off the runway, and we had to talk about it. Again, I asked, we talked about it a little bit, and I'm like, I'm just curious, what was going through your mind? I mean, we had this system moving through, we had the lightning, we had the visibility, We had to go do some maneuvers. I don't know. That was the response. I don't know. Another situation, a commercial multi-engine add-on. This one's really interesting. We were in the run-up, and as he did the whole run-up, everything was going good, and before he started making his turn, as he was starting to make his turn towards the runway, he was having a hard time steering the airplane. So we get out there, he does his emergency briefing, we get on the runway, he applies the throttles. The plane yaws very strongly to the left, which in a multi-engine, that's not what you want at that point. He throttles back, he centers back on the runway, he applies the throttles again. That happens 4 times. We're down to 2,000 feet remaining at the long runway at Coeur d'Alene. And he applies the throttle again, we take off. And I'm kind of thinking in my mind, why? He comes back around, he lands, we taxi off, we taxi back to take off again. It happens 4 more times. On the 4th time, I just said, okay, I'm a pretty gracious examiner. I want applicants to get to the point where they make a good decision so they can learn from it, but there comes a point where I have to intervene, and of course the ACS says if there's any physical or verbal intervention, it's done. So on the 4th attempt, I had to go ahead and just, let's get off the runway, and we talked about it. Why? I don't know.
Everyone has their own stress response, right? And
Yes.
In all fairness, I'm probably a wonderful examiner, but it's a highly, highly stressful event.
Yes.
So we have to know how we react to stress, and there are various ways. People may overcompensate.
Mhm.
Think, do anything, it's going to get through this.
I've actually had someone start singing.
And then there's the other end
Yeah.
of the spectrum too. So
Yeah.
you have to know how are we going to react to stress.
Right.
So any check exam is a high stress.
So as much as I love being an examiner, the thing I don't like about being an examiner is I typically see people at their worst. Because it's a test. They didn't sleep good, and they didn't eat good. They may have had great instruction, and I only get to evaluate what I see at the moment. I can't evaluate what they did yesterday or what they're going to do tomorrow. So that's the one part about being an examiner I don't like. Because I want to see them at their best. And I don't get that benefit.
So was he just not taking care of the B factor, or was there a brake
On this
strike? Or what was the
airplane,
problem?
both engines do not come up at the same rate. So you have to advance both throttles slowly and actually a little bit not together. Now he did all the training in the plane, which I would imagine all the takeoffs he did with his instructor, maybe that happened somewhere, but I don't know. But again, yawing is never good in a twin engine. Uncommanded yawing.
Yeah.
So why? And I already kind of explained that. You made me get to that. And again, the words are, I don't know. And you're right. It could be an inappropriate reaction to stress. I've come to the conclusion that aviation can be very inconvenient. You've always heard that saying, if you really want to get there, drive. Okay? Stress can cause us to act irrationally. Okay? And as an examiner, I take that into account. That's why the FAA says you can exceed the tolerances occasionally, as long as there's prompt corrective. They know that you're not going to be on your best, conditions are not always ideal, you're nervous, but if we're exceeding the tolerances every third or more maneuver, we don't know the answer to every third or more question, we have to look it up, that's not adequate. Okay? But they do understand that. Lack of knowledge and or skill can have negative results. PIC mentality is critical to the safety of flight. And as instructors, if any of you are instructors, we need to be careful that we are helping our students make decisions. I've been on a lot of tests where an applicant gets to a point he doesn't know what to do. And I got to ask myself, and I usually ask the instructor later, are you always kind of intervening when he's a little perplexed? Are you always speaking up when you should just let him struggle through it, as long as we're not talking safety and you're not getting nervous? As instructors, we've got to be sure that we're allowing our students enough rope to fail so they can learn from that experience. Early in the training is not the best place to do that, but as they're getting down to their last 10, 15 hours, getting ready for certification, we've got to be sure that we're giving them opportunities to fail and then have conversations about that. Pilots need to know when to step away. So here's my story. I flew in Mali, West Africa, so we were based out of the capital city of Bamako and did a lot of flights all over the country. We rarely got up into the northern part. It's all Sahara Desert there. A lot of my flying was to, we did about 60% commercial, so we were basically a 135 or charter type company. We had a King Air, a Caravan, and 2 402s. And 60% was commercial. About 90% of the commercial was with gold mines. Very wealthy with gold mine with the gold in that country. And so a lot of South African companies, exploration and producing gold, had some places all over Bamako. On this particular flight, I was going down to a gold mine in Siama. It was about an hour flight. So I would go down, take some supplies, take some personnel. They would take a security person and a government official to the gold mine. It would take about an hour and a half. They'd come out with the solid gold bars. I'd load them in the plane. And I mean, those things are heavy. They're like 55 kilograms, so about 120 pounds a piece. And in the 402, you can't really stand up. So I'm doing this number with these things down, tying them down and everything. But as I was on my return flight in the morning, I got a call on the radio saying that King Air was going to be going up to a place called Gosi to pick up some missionaries with Child Evangelism Fellowship. But they had a maintenance problem, so both 402s were going to do the flight. So my boss said that he was going to go ahead and get a head start in the other 402 after I got to Bamako, drop off the gold, and I was going to be on my way up to Gosi. I had never been to Gosi. We have airstrip directories for a lot of these airstrips, and I had never seen an airstrip for Gosi. I never heard of any of our pilots going to Gosi, so this was kind of an interesting one for me. My boss was about 15 minutes ahead of me, and about halfway up I hear on the HF radio that the airstrip is flooded, and we're going to be landing on the road. I've never landed on a road before. So we got into a little bit of a conversation. I said, you know, Jerry, I'm not really familiar with the airstrip. I'm not familiar with landing on a road. And he said, well, don't worry about it. The missionaries said they would block off the traffic. This is the main road. Now, when you think of main road, it's not like here. It's a 2-lane, and it's the only road, okay? Everything else is desert. So this road basically just winds up from Bamako, comes up near Timbuktu, and comes through Gosi and up to a place called Gao, which is a fairly big town up there in the northeast side. And so I'm a little bit nervous about this. By the time I get up there, he's doing his low pass over the airstrip, okay, the road. Here's Gosi. I still don't know where the airstrip is. I mean, I worked there for a little bit, and I still have no idea where the airstrip was. But I know where the road is. So the section we were going to land on is right here. And as you can see, in rainy season, the airstrip is going to flood. There's a lot of flooding going on right there. So this is the section of road that we're going to land on. And so they had the missionaries block this off and block this off. Obviously, with all the bushes and stuff, we didn't want to go that far. If you know the 402, the wheelbase is pretty wide. And as I'm coming over top at about 1,000 feet, I see him doing his low pass, and the wings are way off the side of the road. And as he's doing his go-around, I say, Jerry, that looks pretty narrow. He says, yeah, it's pretty narrow. I said, is there anything I should watch out for? He said, yeah, there's a bush on the left side. Okay, I'll keep that bush in mind. So he went around and landed, and then I was doing my pass, was going to do a low pass with the option to land. And just as I'm on short final, a car gets through the barricade, so I do my go-around, and I get on downwind. Now, there was a lot of things, for the sake of time, there's a lot of things going through my mind prior to this that were all saying, don't do this. I'm on downwind, if you want to call it downwind to a road. And I tune in on my old Trimble 2000 GPS, Gao. 73 nautical miles will be forever imprinted on my mind. Because for a split second, I was thinking, go to Gao. 73 miles, that road is straight to Gao. They'll get there, it's paved. They built it up on a ridge, so it's not going to be flooded. You may not get home tonight, but you can take them tomorrow. But that split second came and went very quickly. I dismissed it. I continued my descent. I go in and I land. There's about a 15-knot crosswind. And again, when I got out of the plane and we moved the plane around, we had to do almost like a 12-point turn to turn the plane around. That's how narrow the road was. So a 15 knot crosswind. But after I came to a full stop, shut down the engines, I opened my door, I'm climbing out on the wing. Here comes a Touareg running up the road with my wingtip fairing. I never felt a thing. I think it was the bush Jerry was telling me about. And the last 3 feet of the wing of a 402 is hollow. There's no rib. And so when I was in my flare, I must have just clipped that bush on the bottom and expanded the wing enough to pop off the fiberglass wingtip with the strobe light and the nav light. I've never been so upset in my life as a pilot. I had never scratched an airplane. And now I scratched an airplane. Why? I don't know. So what are some contributing factors to this? Inadequate pre-flight action. I didn't know the thing about the airstrip if we were landing on the airstrip. Now we're landing on a road and I hear that news on my way up there. Did I do adequate preparation for that flight? No, I didn't. I acted impulsively. Now again, there was that split second I was thinking right, but I dismissed it. First officer syndrome, which doesn't happen, I don't think, so much in the airlines anymore. You guys can correct me on that because I think air crews or airlines are working very hard to get air crews to work together. But in the history of aviation, in the airlines, there was a real issue there. Why was I the first officer? Because my boss did it first. Now, I have never blamed my boss for that. Why? Because we are the result of our own decisions. It does not matter what someone else does. So I've had a lot of people say, well, your boss did it first. I'm like, yeah, my boss did it first, but I didn't have to. It's a stress. It's a pressure. And it's something that I gave into. But it still was my decision. Lack of risk management. Do you think I ran through the risk matrix? I didn't even think I knew the risk matrix at the time. Okay? And ignorance of company policy. Later, as I read the SOP, we do land on non-airstrips, but they need to meet certain criteria. There needs to be so many feet from the main gear to the edge of the surface. There needs to be so many feet from the wingtip to the tree or whatever obstruction. This road didn't come close, and obviously the bush didn't. So now I got to get in my own mind and ask, why did I do that? I don't know. What was going through my mind at the time? It was not thinking about my boss. It wasn't thinking, I mean, these missions, there was no medical emergency. It didn't warrant me doing something a little bit abnormal because someone's life was at stake. It was picking people up and getting them back to Bamako. Get their itis, absolutely. Now, we had a policy then that we would not fly at night without another pilot. So if we're going to do night flights, we'd be with 2 pilots. So night was looming because remember I did the gold run in the morning. This was in the afternoon. We probably would have had to stay if we went to Gao because by the time the missionaries got there, it would have been a while. Okay, this was mentioned, I think, at our last safety seminar, and man, when I heard it, I wrote it down. You will be tested shortly. You will be tested shortly. We all are. Make your tough decisions at 1G and 0 knots before you're in the heat of the moment. What does that mean?
Pre-flight.
Pre-flight. That means the plane's sitting on the ground at 1G and you ain't moving. That means you're putting a lot of time and a lot of preparation into what you're about to do. I think a lot of people that flying as a career possibly are more serious about this than people that do this as just a means to get somewhere for their business. But I feel a lot of people that do fly for business, that don't fly for a job but fly for business, also take it seriously. But we need to be sure that we're thinking through a lot of the things, and every circumstance can be different before we go. This also means during the flight. So I know this means kind of before the flight, but I think during the flight we need to continue to make decisions, right? When I heard about the airstrip being flooded and the road was the option, I wasn't on the ground thinking about the road. the road. So now I had to think about it in flight. So we never stopped thinking. I'm not saying that.
So how did that story end? How did you get the aircraft out of there? 100 mile an hour?
Oh, okay. Duct tape. Yeah, we duct taped the wingtip fairing and flew home. I didn't want you to ask that, because I'm not proud of that either, because I'm a mechanic. But really, what am I going to do? I'm on the only road that goes to northern, the northern part of Mali, There's no place to put the plane.
Did the duct tape at least match the color of the plane?
No. And you know what's interesting is not my boss, but the mechanic. Now we were all mechanics, but the maintenance specialist, who he was the guy that oversaw the maintenance. He put me on maintenance duty until that plane was fixed. And that was my. I don't want to say punishment because I love maintenance, but I like flying better.
Put some matching duct tape.
All right.
Hey Jay,
Yeah.
did you have a post-flight discussion with the boss?
That's another thing. I was not accusatory to him, and he did not apologize for a week. A week later, I got a call saying, Jay, I think I might have put you in a compromising situation there. Again, in my opinion, he didn't have to apologize. Why? It was my decision.
Yeah, but he could have gone to Gallup.
Yes, he could have. Yeah, he was a very experienced pilot, a lot of time, knew a lot more than me, but that didn't make me do what I did. I did it because I was stupid.
Did he say anything about the push out?
No. Okay, so does anyone know what CFR 14 Part 91-103 talks about? Yes.
PreFlight Action.
Yes! And you guys should have guessed that because that's what we're talking about. Does anyone know what it says? Yes.
You'll be familiar.
Familiar, all, basically everything we could possibly have.
Okay, so the PIC has to be familiar with all available information. And that's the end of the reg, right?
Yeah.
No. Then they go into some specific things, but they could have stopped there, right? Because really, ultimately, as the PIC, we are responsible to be familiar with all available information. Now they go into some specific things, and there's a little acronym. There's all kinds of acronyms out there. There's NW Craft, but the one that we use at Moody is a wealth of information. So the A stands for all available information. Weather is W. E, expected ATC delays, which is really an instrument thing, but really is VFR2. If there's some NOTAM that's talking about an airport that's closed due to an accident or whatever, we should be familiar with that before we go. And then the L is the runway lengths. We need to be familiar with the runways that we're going to be landing and taking off from. T is the takeoff distances. And then H, you really couldn't spell a word with F, a wealth. So it's a wealth. How much fuel? Okay? So we could stop with A. But maybe, a lot of regs are written with us making mistakes in mind, aren't they? They write a reg as a reaction to someone that did something dumb. So I don't know if these came out of that, but these are very specific things that we have to have done before we go. In other words, if something happens, the FAA will come back and say, did you do these things? And if there's no evidence that you did these things, they will say there's no evidence that they ever procured weather information for their flight. There's no evidence. Now, I wanted to camp out on this all available information before I was going to say the next thing. What does that mean?
Never get what they want.
Okay, so give me some ideas of what those extra things are. I mean, they covered these, so those are taken care of, but what would be considered all available information?
Status of the airplane.
Okay, the airplane, TFRs, that's other information. What was that?
Condition of the pilot.
Condition of the pilot.
No dams.
NOTAMs. I mean, we could go all night doing this, okay? So the bottom line is, every mission could be a little bit different, and it may include different things. There's certain things that are always the same. But again, depending where you're going and what you're doing and why you're doing it, could change the list of what those all available information is. The idea is, give time before you go. I'm not a very big touch and go instructor. And the reason is because I feel like I desensitize pilots towards the takeoff. And you've heard that saying, takeoff is optional, but the landing's mandatory. So I want to put a lot of thought into my takeoff before I take off, because once I take off, I got to land. And so, not that we don't do touch and goes, but I'd much rather the pilot put a lot of thought. And again, a lot of where our applicants go are going to be very remote places in the mountains, airstrips that have all kinds of slope. And we want them to think twice before they go, because they got to get down when they're done. Okay, so pre-flight action. One of the hardest decisions you'll ever face in life is choosing whether to walk away or try harder. Now you could take this quote a couple different ways, right? In other words, we don't want to be quitters, but there's a time to quit. There's a time to give it up. So I wanted to talk about just a couple of those contributing factors and pretty much all those scenarios that I gave you. When we talk about risk management, what do we mean by risk management? Okay, so this is a component of ADM. And ADM is a systematic approach to the mental process of determining the best course of action in a given circumstance. Systematic approach. That means there needs to be method to it, right? Mental process. We have to think about it. It's not automatic. So ADM is something that needs to be a part of every flight. Risk management, two terms we have to define with risk management, and people get these two terms mixed up all the time. We have hazard and we have risk. A hazard could be a present condition, situation, that could lead to an undesirable result or unplanned result. Risk is the future impact of those hazards. Okay? So if the event that I'm doing is taking off, and I've got a crosswind, what are the hazards? The crosswind, tailwheel pilots, maybe limitations of the airplane, skill of the pilot, conditions of the day, could be a high density altitude. So these are all in and of themselves not a bad thing, right? But what's the future impact of the pilot's lack of skill or the plane's inability to do what you're asking it to do? It could be going off the runway, it could be damaging the airplane, okay? So when we talk about risk management, it's part of that process of systematically thinking through what you're about to do and making the best decision, okay? Risk management, very important. So these are just some things that I wrote down. I think there was 9. So in my scenario, my skill was probably not, it's pretty good landing in a 15-knot crosswind with a real tight road like that. But obviously hitting the bush kind of proved my skill wasn't that good. Proficiency, what's my condition? So when we talk about the 4 risk factors, what are the 4 main risk factors of every flight? Sorry? Yes? So pilot? Yes. So those are the 4, you could do the 4 M's too, man, machine, mission, or medium, okay? But those are the 4 risk factors that we need to consider before every flight, okay? Aircraft's capability, legality, and then this is a good one. How would it stand up in the court of law? So I had an instructor the other day ask me, I was in the lunchroom, and he says, Jane, I have this guy that has a tailwheel airplane. He's not a CFI. He owns the plane. And I'm not current. And I want to go fly the plane with him. So is there a reg that says that he cannot take the controls and take off and land if he's not current, but he's in a plane with someone who is, but the other person's not an instructor? How often have you let someone take the controls of the plane and you may not be a CFI? Well, at 6,000 feet, it's a little bit different than a tailwheel taking off and landing, right? I told him, I don't know a reg that says you can't do that, but how would it stand up in the court of law? If you ground looped, they're going to find out you're not current, they're going to find out he's not an instructor. What in the world were you doing at the controls of the airplane? So this is not the reason why we don't do things, but it's a consideration. In other words, we're not going to do it because we don't want to get caught. If it's not good and it's not right, we don't do it. But we have to think about how would it stand up in the court of law. Resource management. This one to me is huge because I see it all the time on tests where applicants feel they have to do it all alone. Do the CFIs teach them how to use equipment that's available to them? And I already told you the one about if you're cleared to a fix and you're overloaded, what is wrong with asking for an initial heading? That's a resource, ATC. When you don't know what a symbol means on an instrument approach chart, have you downloaded the supplement? How many times on an instrument test they say, can I use electronic? I say, yeah, the ACS says you can use electronic or paper, it doesn't matter. Then during the test, I will ask questions to a point where I know you don't know a symbol, because what am I testing? Do you know where to go find out? Because all of us are going to come across something on an approach plate we've never seen before. But obviously on PreFlight, it's not automatically downloaded. You have to download it separate. If you carry the books, it's all there. And I've been in so many instrument tests, they don't have it downloaded. Inadequate instruction. Why did the instructor not guide the student to do that? And is this the first time it ever came up? I don't want to sound judgmental. I just get passionate. Okay. How about when you don't know what a symbol on a weather chart means? Do you have a legend or a cheat sheet that you can, if you use PreFlight, man, you can put all kinds of stuff in the documents. When you're cleared for an approach and you have not adequately briefed the approach, ask for delay vectors. How many times on an instrument check ride they're cleared for the approach and I can tell that the applicant didn't even brief the approach yet, and they say, yep, cleared for the approach, and they're not ready. Is it wrong to ask for delay vectors? No. As instructors, make sure that we teach our students to ask for delay vectors if they're not ready. If they're ready, go. Maybe I should stop talking about instructors. I talk to them all the time. But us as pilots, right, use those resources. When you're dealing with some challenging weather, ask center about convective activity or a heading around weather. How many accidents are the result of people trying to circumnavigate what they're getting that's delayed, unless they have onboard radar, right? If they're getting it through XM, it's delayed. And you know a thunderstorm can go from a beautiful little cotton ball to the dissipating stage in 45 minutes. It's the reason why convective segments are only valid for 2 hours, right? Because things are dynamic when that's happening. All right? So asking for some help from ATC. You may be legal but not proficient. Consider delaying until the weather improves or seek some dual instruction. That's a big thing in tests now, is we have to evaluate the applicant's ability to distinguish proficiency. You may be legally current, but are you proficient? And that could mean different things to different pilots. When using different equipment, adjust weather limits appropriately. So you've always been flying glass, now you have a chance to go fly some round gauges. Or the other way around. When winds are close to your limits, are we just going to figure it out as we're on final, or maybe ask for a wind check? Or maybe get somebody on the radio if you have a company frequency. And you guys could probably think of some others as well, but I mean, the resources are endless. And we want to continue to challenge ourselves to know as many resources as we can. Human behavior. Okay, so if any of you guys are CFIs, you went through the FOI, Fundamentals of Instructing, and they talked about human behavior. What is the definition of human behavior? John, you know I want to ask you, because we were through this not too long ago.
I'll take a crack at it. Well, an element is how a person reacts to stimuli.
Okay, and there's a lot of definitions. But what they say in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook is the factors that determine how someone will respond in predictable ways. So 2 words, factors. What are the factors that determine how someone's going to respond? Knowledge, culture, experience. Okay, what was that? Okay, urgency. Beliefs, what they believe. They react in a certain way based upon what they believe. I mean, we can go through a list. Upbringing. Okay, these are all factors. Why is predictable an important word? Because if you know that about yourself, or if you're an instructor and you can be determining those things for your student, you know how to teach that student, or you know how to respond in a situation. Because you are a product of all those factors. I was not accepted into Moody's program the first time. We had to go through a flight camp. It was a 5-day event where you would come and pull weeds for an hour. Then you'd sit in a maintenance class and learn about a magneto. And then you go into maintenance lab and go time it. I never got it right. I actually kind of ripped up the instructions because I built a lot of models as a kid, trucks and airplanes and that kind of stuff. I never followed the instructions. So it didn't really look what was on the box. And then you'd go and have a flight class, and then you'd go fly, and you'd never flown a plane before for an hour. You'd wash and wax airplanes. And so what they were looking for was attitude and teachability. And they sat there with a clipboard and pictures of you, and they'd write comments as you're waxing the airplane. It was a little bit intimidating. And I didn't get accepted the first time because I had this hazardous thought attitude of impulsivity. I would make a very quick decision, which we want pilots to do that, but I didn't make those decisions based upon all the available information. And evidence of that was when it came to the magneto, I was like, and I just started trying to do what I could, and I didn't get it put together right. On the flight, I already had my private pilot's license, but I'm flying, and the instructor asked me, "Where are you?" And I says, "Here I am." How did I know that? Well, there was a power line. There was a power line on the chart, so that's where I'm at. It wasn't oriented right. So, there was nothing that made sense. I had impulsivity. So, to this day, I don't forget that I'm impulsive, and I will always be impulsive. My wife and I are both impulsive. If we decided to go to Chicago tonight, we would do it. Who's going to feed the dog? The kids are out of the house, so we don't have to worry about the kids. But, impulsivity is not a bad thing, but it can be a very bad thing in certain situations. So me knowing that about myself can help me control that. So when instructors come in and ask me questions, wait a minute, let me think about that. Pull a book out, look in the book. So we have to know these things about ourselves. Okay, so that predictable is a very important piece. And then this is the last thing I want to leave you guys with, is the responsibility we have as airmen, as pilots. Those people's heads that you fly over every day don't sign a waiver giving you permission to do that. Now we do get people that want to retire and move near airports and complain about the noise. I kind of thought that would kind of be a known. But we do have a responsibility, and we have to remember that what we do is bigger than ourselves. It affects a lot of people. And if we make a bad decision that costs lives or causes injuries or damage to an airplane, there's a lot of other people that are involved with that. And so we have to remember that every time we fly, this is not some side thing that we do. This is something that needs our full, immediate attention. Before, especially in multi-engine airplanes, before I do anything, I always think through it as the examiner in my mind. I'm going to do this. If he doesn't do this, I'm going to do this. I am ready. Tail wheel, same thing. Now, that doesn't mean the other planes you don't have to do that, but those things can get you in trouble pretty quick at certain times. And we always have to think through the things that we're doing before we do them. And that's that adequate preparation. Okay?
Thank you, Jay. We don't have any questions for Jay. Angel.
Was the singing okay, or did that not?
Oh, this guy was in a choir before he came to Moody. He was good. He was actually out in the practice area doing stalls for the first time solo, but he had the mic locked. So all the students were up at dispatch and listening to him.
So I guess that kind of answers the question I wanted, which was it okay with you? That's not
Sure.
when you're just judging
Sure.
the singing.
If he wasn't singing good, it probably would have been a problem. But
So for those of you online, the question was, is singing okay during a practical examination? And
I've never had that happen on the practical.
okay, again, for those of you that are online, make sure you send us an email at the email link in the comments section. That way we can give you Wings credit. Thank you for joining us tonight. We realized the camera was a little bit dark. It looks great now, but when we turn the screen on, it gets dark for the presenter, but thank you for your patience. Again, thank you for being here tonight. We do have, I believe, some books here that are available for free.
Absolutely. So a friend of mine was a pilot in Alaska for 15,000 hours. He, over the years, gathered a lot of books.